Most Spring Boot developers know that you can use the application.properties file or the application.yaml file to set up global properties that can be accessed anywhere inside of your Spring Boot applications. But what a lot of developers don't realize is that you can actually put structured data into those files, and through the configuration properties annotation, Spring Boot will take that data and turn it into maps or lists or even inner classes. It seems like magic, and it kind of is, and it's that magic that I want to show you and demonstrate to you next. Starting off, you can see that I've got a little application here. It's a Spring Boot application, implements command line runner, and it's got a property called food whose value is injected from the application.properties file, which you can see on the right-hand side. Line 14 gets the value of favorite.ca.food from the properties file injected in at runtime. That is the value of poutine. That's one way to gain access to properties in an application.properties file. You'll also notice that we also have the environment object auto-wired in. If you don't want to declare a property, you can just access an application.properties value using the environment object. And you can see there on line 28, 29, I broke that one line into two. You can see us getting the favorite city, env.getProperty favorite.ca.city. So this is the basic way to gain access to properties in a properties file. This is using the configuration properties, which is the subject of this tutorial, but this is just sort of the basics, allowing us to frame exactly how application properties work for the most part for regular people. And we kind of run this code, and you can see it says, I love to eat poutine. It also says, I love to visit Montreal. Boom, our application is working. What's there to worry about? Okay, so that is step one. Now, before I go on to step two, in application.properties, we've declared favorite food and favorite city. We really should be talking about YAML whenever we talk about application.properties. So if you were interested, you could always, use an application.yaml file instead of using an application.properties file. And so in this case, rather than, I'll move this over here so it all looks a little bit easier to see, instead of favorite.ca.city over on the right-hand side, I could use a YAML file to say favorite, hierarchy CA, hierarchy city is Toronto. I'll comment this out over here. And now if we were to run this, well, Spring Boot will go to the application.yaml file first and then go to the application properties file second. Since we've commented out properties, we've got it in the YAML file. If I was actually to run this code, well, we would end up seeing it print out that my favorite city is Toronto, which is being pulled from the YAML file. So boom. There we go. I have done due diligence to YAML in this tutorial. I now feel good about myself. Okay, now I wanted to talk to you about not just pulling out simple properties from the application properties file. I actually want to talk to you about pulling out things that are much, much cooler than that. One thing that you can pull out from one of the things that you can pull out from an application properties file is a list. So for example, maybe I want to have a list of all of my favorite actors, right? Bill Shatner, John Candy, Ryan Reynolds, Seth Rogen. I can go into my application properties file and list them all out. You can see it's kind of listed like an array right there. And then I can have Spring Boot pull that information into my application. Now, in order to do it with lists and maps and inner classes, what you need is you need to use the configuration properties annotation. And I'm going to move that over there just so that we can look at all of this code together. They also suggest that when you do this, you create a new class just to handle these properties. And then this class can be injected in whenever these properties are needed. So I'm going to create a new class called favorite things. Just a standard Pojo. I'm just going to decorate it with the component annotation. And I'm going to decorate it with the configuration properties annotation. I'm going to do a quick Control-Shift-O to organize my imports. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to pull a bunch of properties from my application.properties file, but the only thing that I'm interested in right now are things that have the prefix. And what is the prefix? Favorite.ca. Because you can see on the right-hand side, all of my favorite actors, it's favorite.ca.actors. So we don't need to worry about the preamble. We can worry just about the data there. And so what I can now do is I can say, hey, those actors, I want to hold them in a list. Okay? And I'll just call actors. And I'm going to add in the requisite setters and getters. So source, generate getters and setters. And so now we have all of those actors there, all held in this list. Looks like, did you notice that red X there? Okay, if you see that red X, you need to get your eyes checked, because that is a white X on a red background. But I need to organize that import, bring in that list class. And I guess you should probably, genericize that. I'm a old programmer from before Java 5, so I get lazy sometimes. But now that looks all pretty good, right? Okay, we've got everything required done. Now, what do we have to do in order to take advantage of this list in my application class? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to auto wire in. I'm just going to call it faves. Control-Shift-O to organize my imports. Now, right there, I called it favorite thing, and I should call it favorite things. Allow me to just rename the file. Everything is good. Okay, so I've called it favorite things, and then just faves in my code. And then when my code runs, I can say system.out.println. And in this case, I'll just say faves.getActors. And in theory, that should probably just print out like a JSON string of all of my favorite actors. Now let's see if that data on the right-hand side has been packaged up properly in a list, all packaged inside of that configuration properties annotated object. So right-click, run, and there you go. Bill Shatner, John Candy, Ryan Reynolds, and Seth Rogen. And of course, that's just a list. So I could say get 0. Right? And run this as well. It would be get 0. Run this as well. And boom, there we go. Bill Shatner. Okay, so life is pretty good. I think this is all looking pretty interesting. Now, quite often when you're working with lists, you're not going to be working with just arrays of strings. You're going to be using arrays of objects. So I'm going to up the ante a little bit here, and I'm going to create, going to add into my application properties file something a little bit more interesting here. So you can see that now I've got another array, but this array, each element has two properties. Discovery and an inventor. So I'm actually going to go and create a brand new class, and I'm going to call it inventions. I'm actually going to call it invention singular. Okay, so I'm going to create a brand new class. I call it invention. And the invention is going to have properties that map to discovery and inventor. So I'll say string discovery, string inventor, string discovery. Add in the requisite setters and getters. So now I have an actual object, an actual Java class. I don't know, what else can we throw in here? We should have more than one, right? So, okay, so element 1, what is the discovery? We can say that somebody discovered the Java language. Who was that? Canadian Gosling did that, James Gosling. Okay, so now we've got two properties here. And so how can I take this structured data, pull it into a list in my code, but not just a list, but a list that holds inventions inside of it. Well, I'm going to head over to favorite things here, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to create a list of invention object, and I'll call it inventions. And did I spell everything correctly? Boy, invention. I am having a hard time with the spelling. They really need to fix Java so that it doesn't get so upset when things are spelled incorrectly. Just one of the big flaws of the language. Okay, get actors, set actors. I need to get and set all of these properties. Okay, so we want inventions, set and get as well. Okay, and then we go over to our application. And in our application, we'll print out, hey, I want to actually see information about the inventions, right? Did we actually get the data that is in our application.properties file? Did we get it out of that? And did we create a list of items where the list actually holds invention objects? And I'm pretty sure that we're going to get this right. So faves.get inventions .get 0 .discovery. Okay, that all looks good. That should bring us insulin for diabetes. Right click, run as a Java application. And boom, we've got Bill Shatner in our first list, and then we've got a little call out to Banting, who invented insulin for diabetics. And that is now the data from this properties file coming back into our system as a genericized list, all of which I think is pretty darn cool. Now, I will say, if you wanted to get sneaky, you could actually put all of that in your YAML file as well. So this is a pre-configured YAML file that I have, but you can see the list of actors here: Shatner, Candy, Reynolds. The YAML is a little nicer because you don't have to say index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. Similarly with inventions, it's a little less tied into the array element numbers. So discovery, insulin, Banting, discovery, basketball, Naismith. No, we've got 2 Naismiths there. Oh no, we do. Java and Gosling. Okay, and then finally, well, why don't we take a look at how we can actually take stuff and put it into a map. So in our YAML file, let's use the YAML file here and see if we can get that to work. We've got attractions for Ontario, it's Niagara. For Alberta, it is Banff. And for British Columbia, it is the Trans-Canada Highway eastbound out of British Columbia. Now that would be a map, right? Name, value, pairs. So let's see if we can create the map here. So map of 2 strings, and it is attractions, and I'm going to organize these imports. So source, organize imports, Control S to save, Control Shift O to organize my imports, source, generate getters and setters, and there we go. We got the getters and setters for those properties. Okay, that is now saved. Now, this map of attractions should map to the list of attractions in the YAML file for Ontario, Alberta, and BC. Okay, let's see if this all wires up. I go back to my application. And in my application, well, I'm going to do another systemout.println. I'll make it the first one. And it's faves.get attractions. And I'm just going to print out all of the attractions here, right? This should just print out a hash map for me if everything works correctly. Yeah, let's move that so that we can see all of the code there. We don't really need to see the auto wired on environment and the value. Okay, let's see, run as a Java application. And let's see if we get Niagara, Banff, and the Trans-Canada Highway. And there we go. Niagara, Banff, and the Trans-Canada Highway eastbound. Boy, oh boy, that all looks pretty good. And okay, it looks like we've used a keyword there. On, I believe, is a keyword for true or false. So our output was actually true there, if you notice that. I'm going to change that to ONT, run as a Java application. I guess maybe you have to put ON in quotes. That's funny. I didn't realize that. Now we got ONT, Ontario, Niagara. Alberta is Banff, and BC is Trans-Canada Eastbound. Yeah, I noticed that. I saw that ON was a different color, and I was like, why is that? By the way, YAML is a subset of Java, a superset of JavaScript as well, so it's totally JavaScript compatible. But okay, that was a funny little thing to have happen to me there. Now, by the way, I said earlier that anything in the application properties file will override anything in the YAML file. So in the attractions, we have Niagara, Banff, and Trans-Canada Eastbound. I'm going to shorten that in the application properties file. So let me bring the application properties file out. Okay, so it's just Niagara, Banff, and HWY East. It is not as verbose as the YAML file. Niagara, okay, Niagara, Banff there. I'll say Niagara Falls, and then Banff Springs, okay, and then the Highway East. So just now the YAML file is different from the properties file. I'll come over to my code, right click, run as a Java application. No, it's because this is completely and totally wrong. I don't know where Spring Boot config examples came in. Again, the fact that it wants spelling and syntax done correctly, I don't know what I copied from there, but I got a whole bunch of nonsense data. No, we should see Niagara Falls, Banff Springs, and that. So let's run this again. Run as a Java application. Sorry to lead you astray there. And now we see Niagara Falls, Banff Springs, the Highway East, the full content from that file. So there you go. I think that's pretty cool. I'm going to put up both the application properties and the YAML file there. But yeah, I think that's very, very cool. I mean, we're all familiar with the ability to just put a property in here and pull it out with environment or the value annotation. That's sort of standard stuff that you learn right when you learn about application properties. But here we've really taken it to the next level. We've used a YAML file, or we've used an application properties file. We've put structured data in there, data that could fall into a map, or data that could fall into a list, or even a genericized list where it's actually a list of, in this case, inventions. I think that is super cool. And then also just the comparison to YAML. As I said, YAML is fantastic. It is DevOps compliant. And so we should be pushing toward using more YAML. And you can see, I just think that YAML, the way that it's structured, just looks a lot easier to read. It's easier on the eyes, and it looks pretty good. There's a couple of drawbacks to using YAML. And I've got a tutorial on application properties versus application.yaml. So I would highly recommend you check that out if you want a deeper dive on that. Now, I'm going to close that, and I'm just going to go over these files again. So the important file here for Spring Configuration Properties Annotation was this favorite things class. And what we did here was, well, we had the component annotation, obviously, that's needed for Spring. But we had the configuration properties annotation, and we set that prefix. So it was only going to start looking for properties that started under favorites.ca in the YAML and application properties file. We declared variables that match the name of the properties after the prefix. So actors, inventions, and attractions, those all map to actors, inventions, and attractions here in the configuration file. Once we had this file created with the setters and getters, you need the setters and getters in there. What we did was we came over to the application class, and what we did was we auto-wired in the favorite things. And once that was auto-wired in, anytime we were inside of a method which ran within the context of Spring Boot, we're able to get any of those properties, get attractions, get actors, get inventions. And even that get inventions, the cool thing about that was actually bringing back items in a list that were actually prepackaged in objects themselves. We've got that invention object that everything was pushed into. So there you go. That is how you use that very, very cool Spring Boot configuration properties annotation. There you go. Now, as I said, that's about it. I've got some really in-depth tutorials on application properties. So if you want a deeper dive, go please and check those out. But otherwise, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the tutorial, why don't you head over to the serverside.com. I'm the editor-in-chief over there. I don't know if I actually introduced myself. I'm Cameron McKenzie, editor-in-chief of the serverside.com and a big advocate of Spring Boot and the Spring framework. Also written a couple of books. You can see Hibernate Made Easy behind me, What is WebSphere, Pickering of Springfield, all about the Simpsons, and then also Darcy DeClute Scrum Master Certification Guide. I helped do some final edits on that. If you're agile and working with Scrum and you want to get Scrum Master certified, well, I use that to pass both the PSM1 and PSM2 exams, and a lot of people are using it to score 100% on the product owner exam as well. So feel free to check that out. And finally, if you enjoyed this tutorial, why don't you subscribe on YouTube?